The human brain is a complex network of billions of neurons, each interconnected, each vital. But this extraordinary organ can be quite delicate, and your whole world could change in an instant. Traumatic brain injuries can steal away cognitive functions, motor skills, and even our very sense of self. That squishy gray matter that keeps us alive, conscious, and occasionally insane is a complicated network that works together in ways we have only begun to understand. Today, we're noodling on our noodles and exploring the many ways it can all go terribly wrong and amazingly right. That's what you're in for today on Impolite Society.
Oh, I just detest rude, unladylike young ladies.
I hope you don't mind me being a tad rude.
I myself am strange and unusual.
Don't be rude.
That is some weird, wild stuff.
Shocking, isn't it?
It's a scandal!
But it's provocative.
Please stop making me blush.
Welcome back to Impolite Society. I am Lara.
And I'm Rachel.
Did you know, Rachel, that you have an extraordinary machine on you right now?
I think the extraordinary machine was actually my nickname in college.
Ooh,
So-
like a sex machine?
You know it. I love machine. Or, a pounding natty lights machine. One or the other.
But no, it's not a sex machine. It's not a natty light machine. And it's not even your phone, that seems to be welded into everyone's person nowadays, pinging you until you lose your fucking mind with all the blings, the bops, the boops. I hate phones. And I'm really over technology right now. Anyway, no, it is your brain that I'm talking about, and it is one crazy little piece of engineering. So, I want to let you know what sparked this episode. And this was a story that I had heard way back in college psych class. It was about a man who had this really horrific accident and kind of what happened to him afterwards. And I thought, okay, I bet there's enough people out there to make a gross and pretty easy episode about damage to the brain.
Just, how many different brain splatters, right? That was the original thought. Just
Yeah.
different brain splatters.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
But as I got to researching and looking at these stories, I found myself less and less interested in that gore factor and more into these thinkers that we got up there because they are just amazing.
They are. If you think about it too hard, though, it makes your head hurt.
Truly. But it's also a little terrifying, right? Is your whole self is in there, in your skull, wobbling around in some cerebrospinal fluid, just one blow away from total devastation.
And what's even more terrifying is that everyone you love, what makes them is in the same situation, teetering on the knife's edge, man.
Ugh.
Especially when they're little people.
Oh, God, and their soft skulls.
Yeah, that the shell isn't even fully there yet.
I know.
And they want to die so badly. They try so hard.
It is the human condition, man. It's a rough ride to be on. So instead of a gross out episode about the horrible and gory brain injuries that we can do, this is more of an admiration episode about just the brain is crazy. And the human brain can go haywire in so many ways. I mean,
I think that's evident by many of our topics.
yeah. And I also call back to the technology and social media that I reference because I feel like we are just all losing our goddamn minds lately.
I don't know. I think I am the most sane I've ever been. So,
Well, kudos to you because you might be the
No.
only one.
that's just called delusion, right?
But there are more tactile ways for everything upstairs to go horribly, horribly wrong, and some very creative ways that you and your brain manages to emerge on the other side.
That's the human condition, man, right? We emerge on the other side. I didn't even get into all that Donner's party talk on the little chit chat we had. I mean, they killed a bear. Just a bunch of starving people out in the western frontier in the middle of winter killed the grizzly bear. How? I don't know. Humans, we find a way.
We endure. It's what we do. We find a way. That's what Ian Malcolm's quote should have been. Not life finds a way. Humans, we find a way. And
yeah.
In this research, I kind of stumbled upon a little subculture of people on the internet, which was victims of TBIs, traumatic brain injuries. And a traumatic brain injury is what it's called. I think it's kind of self-explanatory, but when external forces like a blow to the head, someone bashing you with a heavy object, whatever it is, causes severe damage to your brain. And even if somebody has recovered from their brain injury with extensive therapy, like speech therapy, physical therapy, any kind of therapy you can think of to get your body working again, they could be functioning, but at the same time living with terrible side effects like acute memory loss, severe headaches, emotional regulation issues, behavioral issues, all kinds of really terrible life-altering shit.
Does a rampant TikTok use count as a TBI? Because I feel like I have all those same symptoms.
No, definitely not the same. Because, I mean, these people, they're really suffering, and it's sad.
Yes, not to make light of them. Correct.
Yeah, there are all these things that modern
medicine... But I do have
medicine...
behavior issues, for sure.
All these things that modern medicine and doctors can't really help them with. These doctors, they can do therapies, but when it comes to how the brain functions and how it regulates themselves, there's not much that they can do. They can offer them antidepressants, talk therapy, coping mechanisms, but on the whole, it's this thing of either your brain is going to get better over time or it won't. And there isn't a good way to say which it's going to be or when it's going to be. And that mystery of what the brain does and on what timeline that it does it is how we get people waking up from comas for after 20 years or some crazy shit like that. It's just no one knows. It's a mystery up there in the old noggin, and there's people that are suffering.
Well, I kind of like that, though. Not the suffering, but that it's a mystery, right? I feel like we need to have some mysterious thing. Whatever sprinkle of electricity in our brains that makes us human, I don't think that's ours to understand.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you're going to have a lot of mystery then in this episode. You're going to enjoy this because a lot of this is
good.
Really weird. And adoy, the brain, it's complicated. Nobody on Earth is going to tell you this is how the brain works.
Right, and that makes sense because it's a brain studying the brain. There's no way for the brain to understand itself, right?
It can't transcend,
it
right?
feels synchronous, right? That if it did, it would just create this vacuum that would open a wormhole that swallows the universe.
It's a black hole in your mind.
Yeah.
I
mean, the universe.
If we can understand how like a kidney works or a liver works, in theory, we should be able to do the same thing with a brain. But
can a kidney understand how a kidney works? That's
no.
the question.
I mean, that's actually a fair point. That's a fair counterpoint. and so mighty podcasters that we may be, I'm not going to be able to tell you this either about how the human brain works, but I am going to give you a basic rundown of the regions of the brain, what they do, and some of the stories that I think just by hearing them is going to give you an idea of how crazy, complicated, unknowable, and absolutely bizarre the human brain is.
Lego.
So let's kind of get an idea of what is going on in our think tanks by exploring the 4 basic regions of the brain.
I love this. I love how I feel like in the year-end recap, we were like, we're going to stay light. We're not going to dig in the weeds. And here we go. Laura's going to teach us. We are going to teach you how the human brain works.
No, I just told you I'm not going to do that because nobody
She's got the
can
answers.
do that.
And I got the quips. And that's why we make a podcast. Let's go.
Fuck you. So it's not simple, but each of these 4 sections or lobes that I'm going to talk to you about, they have 1,000 substructures. So there's your street, there's your zip code, there's your county, in your state. So just keep that in mind, that the locations I'm talking about brain states.
Yes.
There are so many other things in there. And if you want to know more, just go to medical school, because that's the only way you're going to understand it.
In the middle of my lobe.
All right. Dun, 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 dun. Okay.
That kind of vibe.
Starting in the front, frontal lobes. Clever name, right? So these are located right behind your forehead, and that thick ass skull designed to protect these babies. And this is the largest lobe in the brain and makes up most of our cerebral cortex, which I'm going to tell you is the brainiest part of our brain. So
the most brainy. It tracks.
The cerebral cortex is all that wrinkly bit that you see in your Halloween Jell-O mold, right? You know, the little, the curves. That is your cerebral cortex. It's the outer part of our brain, and that is what makes humans seem human. And our cerebral cortex, you know what? I'm just going to call it CC. Our CC, cute little nickname. Our CC is more developed than in animals, and that gives us the ability to really think our way out of shit that animals can't, like the Donner Party killing a grizzly bear in the middle of winter without proper weapons. Like that, these are the things that we can do. And the frontal lobes are responsible for a lot of things. Just some examples. Executive function. So planning, organizing, self-monitoring, all that kind of stuff. Behavioral and emotional control. Regulating emotions, moods, reading the emotions of others, that social aspect.
So it seems like a lot of the things that people struggle with these days.
Maybe our frontal lobes are falling out of the front of our face.
Mm-hmm.
Language, expressive language, speech production, and decision making. So making decisions and solving problems.
So basically just a few minor things that separate us from the animals, right?
Yeah. Just a few minor things. And you're right, because it's pretty fucking important. This is often described as the area of the brain that holds your personality. This is the section of the brain that's responsible for all the day-to-day thoughts that you have.
And this is weird that you mention this, because like when I think about it, my thoughts are like right behind my forehead. Like that's where my thoughts are. Did you feel your thoughts in your brain? Is that a normal thing?
I don't, but I know tension headaches occur, and it's usually right there.
So like your internal monologue or whatever, it's not like you don't feel it like just right here. Like my head's huge. Like I'm not thinking from the back.
I've never thought about
It's
it,
like,
about
I'm
where
here.
it's coming from.
I'm
But I mean,
here.
but you absolutely are. You're here. Like if you're having like that internal monologue, that is absolutely where it is in
And
the
I feel
front.
it.
There you go. There you
I'm
go.
in tune with my body. Give me a wellness channel on Instagram.
You're going to teach the rest of us how to do it.
Open the chakras.
But yeah, I do. I think that's weird, but I also think it's cool. Just like everything else with the brain. So if you can imagine the importance of that, you can think of when things go wrong here, they go pretty fucking wrong. And to illustrate this point, let's get into the story that kicked off this whole idea for the podcast, which was Phineas Gage.
What are we going to do today? That's Phineas and Ferb, sorry. Did you get that, or was that just...
No, but
No,
it was funny.
okay, never mind.
In 1848, in Vermont, USA, Phineas Gage was a 25-year-old railroad foreman. His job was to clear rocks for the new rail lines by use of explosives. And Mr. Gage was about to have a very bad day at work.
Oh, was his boss going to schedule a last-minute meeting on his calendar that was just called chat?
No,
That
it
always
was
ruined
way
my
worse
day.
than that, because that's what that sounds like now, right?
Yeah.
A very bad day at work. That's what that sounds like. Oh, no. Times have changed.
This one, they're just going to rearrange his brain a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. So the process of clearing rock at this time, it was to drill a hole into the rock, put in an explosive charge, pack the hole with sand, and that directs the blast, right? Light the fuse and step far, far away. To do the sand packing, one would use a tamping rod, which is a large metal rod that was about 10 to 15 pounds and 3 feet long.
So basically when they designed it, they thought, what tool can we create that would make the best, most deadly projectile? Let's do that.
I mean, they needed it to be heavy, right? Because it's got to get the sand down in there, and it needed to be long enough to go far. But yes, you're completely right. Because on this very bad day at work, the tamping rod that Phineas was using created a spark. It set off the charge prematurely. Poor Gage, he was right above it. The explosion drove the rod up out of the hole and right into his head. In my notes, Rachel, I have an image of exactly where it landed. Can you describe what you see for the listener?
So I'm seeing a depiction here that shows a long metal rod going into a skull in, the spot that you would put your contour, right? You're going to put your contour right
below the cheekbone.
Your cheekbone, in the hollow of your cheek. So it's going behind the eye, and it's coming out the top of the skull where a millennial might try to put their slightly off-center part. Because that's where exactly mine is, where it's not center, just a little bit off to the side. And that's where it's popping up at the crown of his head.
Yep.
And as you can imagine, if you've had a rod exploded through your head, there's not a perfect cut. This isn't a hole punch, right?
Yeah, it didn't make a perfect hole and
There is some collateral damage, unfortunately. It looks like the top of his head has a lot of cracks, if those aren't just the normal kind of seams that
they
skulls
are not.
Have. And a couple of those, and then just a hole, and it looks like I'm trying to think of a good analogy for this, like a pie crust, right? When it's got a nice egg glaze on it. Now I'm hungry.
Yeah, well, you're hungry for brains.
Hell
But
yeah.
Phineas, despite these terrible injuries, he lived. And in fact,
That is shocking. Did it go? Okay, I had to ask because I didn't see it in the notes. Did it go all the way through, or did they have to pull it out?
Yes, it went all the way through. It went into his cheekbone, behind his eyeball, out of the top of his head.
Oh, okay. Because I thought you said there was a white part at the end.
Nope. So not only did he live, right after the accident, he seemed like he was okay.
Oh, God.
He was conscious. He was
That's
bleeding.
nuts.
But he recognized his friends. He called them by their name.
He's like cracking jokes.
Not quite, but he was hauled off the site in an ox cart, cared for by his family doctor, Dr. Harlow, sorry. And he got a really nasty infection from, again, the rod shoved through his brain.
This has probably got all his poop hands all over it.
Oh, yeah,
they
totally.
were not sanitary.
Yeah. And that took him 5 weeks to recover from the infection. But after that, he was recovered. He was blind in his left eye, and he had some facial weakness on that side. Can't do a full smile, can't really control the eyeball, but he was going to live. And that would be interesting enough that someone could survive this and be normal. But that's not why Phineas Gage's case is world famous. He is probably the most famous neurological patient of all time, because after this patient, as they say, Gage was no longer Gage.
And that in itself is kind of a tragedy, because you've got a picture of him in here right now, and I'm going to be so honest. Smash.
He is. I was like 25-year-old,
he's a
railroad tamper. He tamping. Oh God, he's got to have
hairline.
muscles. Yeah,
the hairline on him. That's a shame it was not passed on.
Truly. Because after he physically recovered, his physician, Dr. Harlow, he knew him prior to the accident. He started taking extensive notes on Gage's personality changes. And I'm going to read the quotes because I can't summarize these any better than Dr. Harlow did. So he remembers past events correctly as well as before the injury. His intellectual manifestations are feeble. So he dumb. And he is being exceedingly capricious and childish, but with a will as indomitable as ever. He is particularly obstinate, will not yield to restraint when it conflicts with his desires. Dr. Harlow also noted that Gage's employers, they had thought of him as a very capable foreman, but considered the change in his mind so marked that they could not give him his place again. So he lost his job, not because he could not physically work, but because of his temperament. He is fitful, irreverent, indulging at times in the grossest profanity, which was not previously his custom, impatient of restraint or advice when it conflicts with his desires, a child in intellectual capacity and manifestations. He has the animal passions of a strong man. ... That's
yeah,
isn't that ominous, or like what does that
is.
mean, Dr. Harlow?
Yeah, ooh, he likes his animal passions, maybe per se.
It sounds like to me that he maybe almost raped somebody.
Oh, that's fair.
That's how I
100%
read it.
fair. Yeah, I've read about him independently, and he like lacked a lot of inhibitions.
I think I remember hearing something about him peeing like
In a
publicly.
bar?
Yeah, like in a corner or something.
Yep,
Yeah.
that's what I think of when I think of old Gage. And I think is an important question to ask. Was all of this because of the rod, or did Homeboy just happen to discover Andrew Tate's style podcast around the same time? Because maybe his antisocial personality is really just alpha male energy.
You know, the parallels there are disturbing and noted. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it's just like you could spend hours and hours digesting this content, or we could just give you a quick rod to the brain, guys. Like, your choice.
frontal lobe damage, and you can become an alpha male ASAP.
Exactly. I'd say let's sign him up for it.
So this was the first case where medicine could definitively say that a brain injury changed someone's personality. And in the mid-1800s, that was a big deal. The brain was a mystery at the time. They knew it was important, but not really how it worked pretty much at all.
And that makes sense because like they were just coming to understand electricity as a whole,
Yeah.
right? And that's kind of important to how the whole rigmarole up there works, as
Yeah.
I understand it.
Yeah, and this was a time where phrenology was still a thing. Do you know what phrenology is?
Yes,
where
a
they would-
criminal skull shape. I think
Where
that's
they-
a 30 Rock reference somewhere, right? They make a joke about that.
I do criminal shape, but I don't know about. I guess phrenology. I guess falls in the same thing, but I know phrenology is like kind of like fortune telling. Like they feel the lumps on your skull and tell you about your personality. So it's just nonsense. And Gage's case really began this entire field of brain science. This direct correlation between structural damage to the brain and personality was completely revolutionary.
Which is a step up from as we were talking where they thought just being pretty or hot made you a good person.
Yeah,
Which maybe that's what affected Gage as he got less hot. So
could
they
be.
can't prove it
actually.
wrong.
Well, and also I think of like a traumatic injury, even if like nothing was changed in your brain.
You're
right?
changed.
You are changed. Yeah, but
Trauma.
yeah.
But everybody in 1848 had trauma. There was not a non-traumatized person to be seen. This was 2 years after the Donner Party, mind you. So
there you go.
I'm just going to Shanghai. I don't even know where that reference comes from. I'm just going to take over this whole podcast and make it about the Donner Party.
Let's do one. I'm here for it.
I
We're
was
gonna
going
do
to, but it's a little bleak. I think only a few of the kids got eaten, but a lot of the adults got eaten. And I was going to do just dark realities of wagon trains in general, but guess who mostly dies on the regular ones is children and women.
Children make sense, but I feel like women have more longevity.
Oh, they survived the Donner Party better because women are better in like intense survival situations in general because we have slower metabolisms, which is why we're all so fat. Just kidding. We're survivors. We're built to survive.
Built different.
Yeah, we're built for tough. That's why they call me the extraordinary machine, baby.
You sound like the macho Randy Man Savage or whatever. Okay, we're really getting off. Okay, all right.
We got a lot of brain to cover still.
We
Let's go.
do. Okay, back to Gage. So he He spent some time as a freak show attraction for P.T. Barnum. He's traveling around with his tamping
Good for
iron.
him. Get that bag.
Yeah. They think that he actually eventually recovered kind of some of his old personality and became a new kind of normal because he did manage to hold down a pretty steady job as a stagecoach driver for years, which apparently would have required a fair amount of forward thinking and planning.
Executive function.
Exactly. But no one really knows for sure. Record keeping from 200 years ago is shitty. He died 12 years after his accident from seizures that undoubtedly were caused by the accident.
Yeah, something about an iron rod through the head doesn't really scream longevity.
Truly. And after he died, his doctor, Dr. Harlow, was bequeathed. That's the word they use. I don't know what that meant. Did they ask him? I don't know. But he got his skull and tamping iron. And those items, they are still on display at the Warren Anatomical Museum at Harvard in Boston, Massachusetts.
You know, I like the idea of bequeathing other people's body parts. I think that is a solid thing to do. So, Laura, I am going to bequeath your left coccyx. Nope, just your one coccyx. You only got the one.
You
I
only have the
changed
one.
it.
I was going to
I
say.
changed
You
it,
only have the
and
one.
I didn't update my notes. I'm going to bequeath your coccyx to the Satanic Temple because I know how much you love Satanists.
Oh, true. Well,
Originally I had weenus, but you can't donate it because
it's floppy. You can't.
well, yeah, it would disintegrate.
Yeah.
I thought a weenus was a bone. What do I know?
No, it's just the tip of your
Just the skin.
ulna. Well, yeah, the weenus is just skin, but
I
underneath
learned that
is...
because that's the kind of effort I put into these notes.
A+. A+, Rachel. All right, so what I find interesting about these findings, these things that happen with Gage, we see them today. There's a ton of serial killers, other violent offenders. They are found usually to have experienced some kind of frontal lobe damage in their lives. That frontal lobe, it's pretty freaking important in making humans human. So this is like the first time that we really learned that. On to the next lobe of your big, sexy brain. That is the parietal lobe. No, you got to go a little bit farther back. So it sits behind your frontal lobe and is kind of above your ears. Yeah, right where your headphone things are. And this is your sensory processing headquarters. Touch, taste, pain. All the things that your senses gather. This is where your brain takes in information and makes sense of the world around you. How could this go wrong, you may ask? Well, in about a million ways. But I'm going to tell you about a really crazy one, hemispatial neglect.
Yeah, how could it go wrong? I mean, it seems very haphazard that any of this exists in general. So it just like, it's a miracle that it works at all. The fact that most people turn out normal, incredible. But the fact that you said neglect in there, what is it?
Hemispatial.
Hemispatial neglect. Now, this sounds like something else I'm supposed to be taking care of, like neglect. I'm supposed to be doing something. Because I'm probably not doing it, and now I'm going to be anxious about it.
No, you're not neglecting anything.
I'm not neglecting my hemispatial.
No, you are not.
Thank God.
And you would know. Okay, so this one, it's hard to explain. Bear with me. I had to watch a few videos to really grasp how this works. Your brain is split into hemispheres, basically left and right sides of your brain. When it comes to vision, they control the opposite side. So your right side of the brain processes vision from your left eye, vice versa. And you can really see this in action with brain injuries to the parietal lobe because damage to your right side of the brain will affect your left side of vision and perception. Same thing on the other side. So it's like backwards. And so some people who have damage to the parietal lobe, usually that comes from a stroke, which is not a traumatic brain injury, it's an acquired brain injury. They have a complete lack of perception on one side of their body. And I don't mean that they can't see it or feel it or hear it. I mean it just doesn't exist. People, objects, sensations, whatever, it's like it's not there. They don't even know it's not there. It's not like losing vision on one side. Because if you lose vision on one side, you'll know that there's a gap. And you just think, oh, well, I can just turn my head and expand my field of vision so I can see
Your
on the
brain
left.
accounts for it.
Exactly. It's not the case with hemispatial neglect. It is just gone. Out of mind, out of sight. One side of the world doesn't exist. So food on one side of a plate doesn't get eaten. They only shave or put makeup on one side of their face because in their mind, the other side just doesn't exist. They can't draw properly. I put some stuff in the notes in terms of like what they try to copy. They can draw half of a clock, half of a face. They can't even conceptualize the other side of that thing. It's their imagination doesn't even exist on that side. It's just gone.
And you know what? Is it possible to have this like in a migrating sense? Because this sounds a lot like my husband whenever he's trying to find something.
That's just males.
That's like my yuck joke. Oh, husband.
Oh, yeah. No respect. No respect.
Yep. That's the level I've reached.
So what's even more bizarre, I think, than just missing half of your world is the fact that they really don't miss it. They don't describe it to people, or they don't even really think there's a problem. When they're pressed to describe it, they don't know how to talk about it because it's like trying to describe something you've never seen or never even thought of. Of course you don't miss it. It doesn't exist to you. You can't imagine what it would be like to be there. It's not about sight or sensation. It's about the representation of the world in your brain is just gone.
And you know, it makes you wonder what is happening all around us right now that we're just not perceiving.
A part of your brain. Yeah.
There could be things happening, and our brain just is like, nope, not in my reality, bitch.
Totally. The implications of all of these things, like when you really like dig into them and like think about it in an abstract way, you're like, holy shit. and
then you open a wormhole and you like get sucked in and the reality's over. Sorry. Got too close.
These people, they're trying to retrain their brains to look for it, but it's hard. It's like anything you have to learn from the beginning. Yeah, you have to do it like you're a child. And they will often never get over that bias for a one side. And I just think that's such a crazy way to live.
How could you? How could you teach somebody something that they don't know exists? It'd be like all of a sudden getting a new sense. And like imagine that sound didn't exist in your world, and now you want to learn how to hear, and they're like, oh, I'm going to teach you how to hear. I'm going to teach you how to hear. Okay, all you got to do, you just got to listen. Listen for sounds. And you're like, oh, what's the sound? So shit, I didn't get that far in my manual.
Yeah, exactly.
You just hear them.
Yeah.
How are we talking right now if you can't hear?
And they're like, I don't know.
Your information is just being telepathically beamed into my head.
Far as they're concerned, yes, you're getting it. I'm happy to see that you're getting the insanity that this is kind of like ramping up. Okay, next one, occipital lobe. This is the back of your brain, right above your cerebellum, and that's that big wrinkly thing that you see in brain diagrams. We'll get to that later. But so the occipital is actually our smallest lobe of the brain, which is funny to me because we're such sight-based creatures, and yet it's very small, and it is where vision is processed. So anything having to do with sight, visual perception, color, form, motion. Damage to this area can result in blindness, either total blindness or partial blindness, visual inattention, which is kind of like what I talked about with hemispatial neglect, but not totally. Spatial analysis, facial recognition, and a lot more. But one of the most interesting things that can happen if this area is damaged is what is called blindsight. And this is what it's called when someone who is actually blind can see. They're just not conscious that they can see.
So what I'm hearing is blind people are faking it. Is that correct?
No.
Because I knew it. No, just kidding. But seriously, like, would they flinch if I threw something at them? Because, like, I know certain reflexes are processed in different parts of the brain.
Bingo. You've nailed some of it. So,
but give me a degree in neurology, baby.
In brain degree.
I'm Dr. Brain.
So, all right, buckle up a little bit for some bummer index shit.
Always.
This phenomenon, it was discovered through animal experimentation in the 60s. Doctors were slicing out pieces of macaque monkey brains, kind of just to see what would happen. And
It's totally sanctioned, you know.
yeah.
Somebody said, do that,
And
please.
a subject that they named Helen. Also, aside, why do they give him names? This is
It's
just gross.
Yeah, should be subject A, subject
Yeah,
B.
yeah, something like that. Anyway, she had her entire occipital lobe removed. She was completely blinded because she was missing the part of her brain that was responsible for sight. But they noticed under certain conditions, Helen seemed like she could see. So her pupils would dilate in bright lights. She would blink when items came near her eyes.
Yeah.
And after a lot of specialized monkey behavioral tests, and what those are, I don't know. I don't know how they
course.
determine that monkeys
They probably
know these
included
things.
bananas.
Yeah, maybe. They saw Helen seem to sense things, the presence of objects, where they were located, shapes, colors. She was also able to walk around completely new environments with no problems, as if she could see.
So it's like her eyes were still generating and logging data. Her brain just could not translate that data into anything meaningful.
Maybe.
Which is so weird because, like, okay, random tangent. Sight itself is such a fucking gift, man. Because, like, how am I standing here on top of a mountain tearing up at the majesty and it's just light bouncing off other mountains that are miles and miles away from me? What? It's a simulation. It's got to be. No, just kidding. It's just incredible. Anyway,
It is incredible. It's absolutely incredible. And so monkeys, they're all well and good, but they're not people, right? So what happens with people? When doctors knew to look for it, they started seeing it in people as well. So these humans who had damage to their visual cortex, very extensive damage, were totally blinded, but they were able to describe items in front of them. And they could sometimes catch things that were thrown at them.
fakers.
But they were they were still blind. They could not see. And so what it seems like is that their brain is taking in visual data unconsciously without properly processing it, kind of like what you mentioned. And what I think is even more interesting, the patients didn't even know it. They did not like these experiments. They did not think any of their guesses would be correct. They had to be hard-pressed to say anything about an object in front of them. Like the doctor would be like, what color is the ball? And they'd be like, I don't know, I'm fucking blind. You know what I mean? Like they wouldn't want to answer. But when they did, when they guessed, they were right more often than those that were in the control groups.
Now, I don't want to be trite, but there's a metaphor in there somewhere about all of the problems plaguing us. But the fact that a blind person can guess the color of the ball, they can see it, they just can't access that information.
We are what we tell ourselves we are.
Well, no, they can't tell themselves to see, right? I mean,
no,
but
you are, if you have spent a really long time emotionally coming to grips with the fact that you can't see anymore the way you used to, that's an emotional hurdle to go through anyway, right? That you have acceptance. And if you've reached that acceptance, then are you going to be super open to these impulses? You know what I mean? These gut feelings that you have about sight? No, you're going to shut it down.
whatever. My brain, whatever is done. Just kidding. Too much thinking about the brain.
It's crazy. And so some doctors, they don't think that this exists. Others say that it do. Others say that it do.
They're all fakers. We all knew it. They just want to take their dog with them everywhere. We get it. I want to take my dogs with me everywhere too.
No, you don't. You hate your dog.
I don't hate them. I just wish that they went to college and grew up and moved out.
So one theory about how this works is that even though the vision center of the brain is destroyed, there might be some kind of islands in there that are still firing, just not firing hot and heavy enough for the conscious brain to get the signal. And another theory is that somewhere along the optic nerve that connects your eyes to your brain, there's processing going on in transit, right? It's going to different areas of the brain, but we just don't understand how it works. Next lobe up is not really a lobe. It's your cerebellum. That's that wrinkly little thing I mentioned before, kind of on the underside of your brain. This controls complex motor functions and balance, and it has a big job in coordinating your voluntary movements. It does a good amount of coordinating itself. It's processing information sent by other parts of the brain, like your spinal cord and your nervous system. So it kind of takes all this information up the chain and then relays it back down. So if you want to catch and throw a ball, there's a lot of motor coordination going on there. The cerebellum is the hub for all this to and fro from brain to body, back and forth, and at really fucking fast speeds.
And while I'm sitting here in awe, I will also note that this is incredible. This whole process, right? It used to always leave me like speechless how people can zoom in and out in traffic on a morning commute. Everybody could like navigate the physics of cars and timing and anticipating human behavior, that we're not all crashing into each other simultaneously at the same time.
Yeah.
And then on the morning commute, but then they could get into work and then be such fucking idiots. Like every person I worked with that was dumb successfully drove in that day. How many times do I have to say per my last email? But they can just weave in and out and merge flawlessly. Insane.
I think it's because that's like motor skill, right? And those social aspects of our brain are so much more complicated.
I got to rod through it. Rod.
So this structure is also pretty important. So you might be surprised to find that in 2014, medical science discovered a 24-year-old woman that just did not have a cerebellum.
That's nuts.
What was even more amazing? She was fine. Or mostly fine. So she came into the hospital because she had been feeling dizzy and nauseous lately.
Who hasn't?
Exactly. She told the doctor that she had always been unsteady on her feet.
Same.
She had had a hard time learning to walk, according to her mother. And when they gave her a CT scan, the doctors could see why. The cerebellum, the motor section of her brain, was gone. It was just empty. It was filled with cerebrospinal fluid, and there's just a blank space.
And that's a functioning person.
Yes. And so this finding was very rare, obviously. There are cases of this, but they're almost always found in small children. Babies with severe developmental issues often results in a very short and a very sickly life. Cases of people living fairly normal lives like this was pretty much unheard of. And yet, here she is.
Yeah, the rest of her brain really started doing some lifting. It never skipped
Heavy
leg day.
lifting, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that just goes to show you that person in your life, they are missing potentially a part of their brain. Could be.
Can't blame them, you know? You don't even know what they're walking around not knowing. Okay, last lobe, because this is getting hella long. And I did have to leave out a ton of other crazy conditions that I found. I'm going to have to do another one of these episodes. Granted that somebody likes it. But I fucking love the brain. So, the temporal lobe. You want to guess where it's located?
Under my chin.
No. At your temples.
Oh.
Temples.
Where I go to pray.
Yeah. Near the ears on either side of your noggin. It helps process information from your senses. So communication, memory, language, processing emotions, a lot of different stuff going on in there. So we have arrived at our last case of Henry Molaison. That's a guess on the pronunciation. I really don't know there. Sorry, Henry.
He probably doesn't remember either.
Henry had been experiencing epileptic seizures since he was 10 after a bicycle crash. So seriously, everyone wear your fucking helmets.
Please.
Yes. These seizures got progressively worse as he got older, and at age 27 in 1953, he was desperate. So doctors decided to try a surgery to relieve these seizures. They decided to do a bilateral medial temporal lobectomy to surgically resect the anterior 2/3 of his hippocampi, parahippocampi, cortices, and entorhinal cortices, piriform cortices, and amygdala. Whatever that fucking means. I don't know. So what they were trying to do.
Said those words.
Yeah. Same. Some of these.
Amygdala.
Yeah. Basically, they were trying to take out the part of his brain that was causing the seizures. And this was the heyday of lobotomies, and psychosurgery was kind of all the rage. So they got his permission, drilled into his skull, and took out some parts of his brain. But somehow, they took out too much. The front half of his hippocampus on both sides and most of the amygdala, both of which are located in that temporal lobe, were taken out. And I had a hard time deciphering if it was accidentally that they took out more than they intended, or they just didn't know what would happen, right? If they took out this much. Either way, what happened. And that was when Henry recovered from the surgery. He was completely unable to form new memories.
Now, I may be going out on a limb here, but I feel as if Henry should be entitled to some compensation for this one.
Braun and Crouppen? Yeah, 100%.
They took out my client's amygdala. Like, come on, guys. Let's, and you can't put it back in.
Nope. It does not
Imagine
fit back
what
in.
those doctors thought when he woke up, and he was
I
like,
was thinking about the doctor who did this, because he wasn't really involved in like the later like studies of him. I'm like, who is this guy? How did this guy cope with that shit? Like, I don't know. Definitely a lot to unpack here that we don't have time for, but very, very interesting. So Henry, he would forget events almost immediately, about 30 seconds after any interaction. And what was so interesting was that he was not impaired in any other way. Sense of humor, intact. Personality remained the same, unlike Gage. His IQ was the same as it ever was. No perception difficulties, no motor difficulties. He could move around just same as he ever could before. Henry described his condition as, quote, like waking from a dream. Every day is alone in itself. He could remember some of his life up until the surgery, but not all of it. And he seemed to not kind of have a lot of context for the memories. He would forget people the moment he turned away from them, re-meet them moments later.
so kind of like me at a networking event.
Yeah, but at least you would remember you have a
I
face.
had
I was
met them.
talking to somebody, or like, you know,
Maybe.
maybe I know you have a little bit of facial blindness, but like the
Literally-
tie they were wearing or something.
Yeah, literally
know.
the second someone says their name, it just...
Same. I'm terrible with names. But this was like
I'm going
he
to start
just
saying they took out my amygdala.
And so this whole thing, it was a big shock to the medical community.
Really? That taking out brains has negative impacts?
Fair. They thought that memory was an all over the brain kind of thing. But Henry, he proved that they were really wrong, and he became a kind of medical superstar for the rest of his life. People all over the world would come in to talk to him, test him, see what they could figure out about memory in the human brain.
I hope he rode that wave as best he could, man.
I think that he did. And from all the things that I read, he seemed to be in very good spirits about
He's
the
like,
whole thing.
whoa, where am I? What's going on? This is awesome. Every
Yes.
morning. They're like, here you are, Henry. We're going to give you this awesome breakfast, and we're going to take you to be studied. And he's like, hell yeah. I don't care that I did the same shit yesterday. It's all new and exciting to me.
Exactly.
It's be like vacation every day.
Truly.
Maybe Henry's onto something.
So, much like blindsight, doctors discovered that he actually could remember some things. He just didn't know that he could. So doctors would have him practice a physical task, like drawing something, and he would forget that he had done the practice immediately. It was just gone. He didn't have any idea that he did it. But over time, he made steady progress at that task. So the pictures that he was drawing were get better and better each time.
He's like, a flower? What's a flower? I've never seen a flower. I've never drawn a flower before in my life. And he's like, wait a minute. The shading on your stem's not quite right there, doctor.
Yeah. So it indicated that this kind of muscle memory of some kind was taking hold. His higher brain couldn't recognize the memory, but it's like his hand was getting better. He could also draw an accurate and detailed map of his home, even though he should have forgotten what the next room looked like 30 seconds after leaving it. So it's like these routine muscle memory items kind of got burned in there somehow,
That's why
despite
you do
him not
drills
knowing.
when you play sports.
Exactly. So Henry's condition gave doctors a unique opportunity to look at all these different kinds of memory, which I didn't know there was more than one kind of memory, but of course that makes sense. Spatial, episodic, topographical, conscious, and unconscious memory, all different and potentially in different areas of the brain. So one of the findings was that these repetitive tasks that he was taught were stored and retrieved from different areas of the brain, places we didn't even realize, places that he did not get cut out. And it's all massively technical. I do not understand it. I read at least 3 or 4 articles about it, and it is just so interesting.
And this is actually reminding me, when you said episodic memory, I was like, why does that ring a bell? It's because back in the Big Talk days, it came up when we did an episode on drinking, which I need to revisit. So they didn't need to take out this guy's brain. All they had to do was understand that different parts of memory were stored in different parts of the brain. When a blackout drunk person couldn't remember what they did the night before, but yet they still remembered how to walk and like how to do a bunch of different shit. I feel like that should have clued him in a little bit about memory before just like slicing open the kid's head.
Well, I don't think that they meant to do that to him, but I mean, if you're
Really that
I don't know that I could see how somebody could make that argument, but
yeah, it's just like there's evidence of the different kinds of memory without like
this
being like,
having
what does this do? What does this have to do?
Yeah.
Or I mean, maybe not Henry, because he was like, let's leave it all in the court. But Helen, the monkey.
Yeah. True.
Let's like not do that to living things.
100%. Yeah. But Henry, like I said, he was a good sport about all this. He was happy to participate until he died in 2008 at the age of 81.
That was a shock to him.
Yeah. Every time.
He's like, I'm old? What?
And he had to live in care his whole life, as you can imagine. Burn the fucking house down. He can't cook food, all this kind of stuff. But when he died, he did agree to give his brain to science. And
he bequeathed it, or somebody did.
Bequeathed it, yeah. Sign this paper. Okay.
Yeah.
And science has been having a ball with his brain ever since. It has been sliced into 2,401 sections, placed on slides, and it is used as a permanent neurological research resource. And a digital 3D atlas of his brain is available online for all to see, free of charge.
So he lives on.
He does.
His memory lives on.
There was one quote that I didn't put in the notes. There was one researcher that he worked with extensively. And he said, it's all you live and you learn. You learn and I live. I know, right?
Henry's a hysterical person.
Exactly. I mean, I think he would have been a really cool guy to get to know. And seeing pictures of him, he looked like my grandpa.
Yeah, I feel like he could have handled a lot of like adversity and with that attitude,
Yeah.
Or is just not remembering the secret of life, like my
Truly.
dogs.
Yep. It just goes to show, man, too much getting in your head, too much navel gazing, all that kind of stuff. It is not good for anybody.
If you're too worried about what you can't see what you can see.
Exactly.
Put that on a poster.
Okay. So that is Lara's crash course on the human brain. And
that was pretty fast for all things considered. For the number of words that were written on a page.
I'm going to take that compliment and I'm going to internalize it. And so what really jumped out at me about all this research was not just the hard life that people with traumatic brain injuries live, because it's really fucking hard. It's
not the same as TikTok watchers.
No.
It's not brain rot.
No.
For all those
it's not
who are
the same.
curious.
They're dealing with real shit here, and they're suffering, and they don't know how to fix themselves. But really what jumped out at me was the unknowable nature of the human brain. Everyone has got one. Each one probably functions differently. Each person has this different level of neuroplasticity where like one side of the brain can compensate for another. There are these deviations in how we may store memories or thoughts or emotional truths, and some people might have faulty wiring in whatever area of the brain that is responsible for emotional truths. Who the fuck knows? But consciousness, personality, whatever it is in there somewhere.
The spark of life and what makes a
Exactly.
person a person.
It's in there, but we don't know where. We don't know how it works. And this just unraveling consciousness and self. Are you really a person? Are you just a collection of structures and electric impulses? It's all some really heavy shit. And I'm thankful that I have the structures that allow me to think those thoughts. So,
But to not really fully grasp it either. Because, as we mentioned,
Wormhole. So, socialites, just be thankful for your big brains. They are 1 in a billion, and take care of them, appreciate them.
And if you want to appreciate what you heard today, nothing gets our brains a humming more than a 5-star rating and review on whatever podcasting platform of your choice.
That gives our brains a big brain hard on.
Yes, and it helps us protect it because otherwise we have to face the realities of being two nobodies podcasting into the world. And our
But
brains
having
don't
so
like
much
that.
fun.
I am. I'm loving learning about how precious my brain is while I ply it with toxin. Fun. But we are also on the YouTube now. We figured out a way to upload all of our podcasts to be videos. So if you're a YouTube podcast person, no longer will you need to get out your stupid Spotify app. I shouldn't say that because Spotify gods, please help us. But if you listen on YouTube, we've noticed that the discoverability there is much better than a regular podcasting app.
Yeah, it is.
So if you do happen to be a podcast listener or just a YouTube person in general, give us a follow, give us a rating, a review there. We appreciate it. It's been a wild ride in the few days that we've put on it. I'm like, why are we sleeping on this whole time?
I took a screenshot of it. It was like, you've been discovered based on adult baby diaper lovers, like all this kind of stuff. And I was like, never things that I thought that I would see. But here we are. Yeah. These searches led people to you. Number 1, ABDL. Number 2, vagina shave. Number 3, adult diaper.
Yeah. The thing about it is if we had seen this, if we had showed this to ourselves in 2020, would we have pursued this concept?
Yes, I would have.
I'm just happy it's not all 65-year-old men, right? I
Yeah.
can see the breakdown, and there's young people in there. So we need to rethink about what we are, because maybe we're not just like a bunch of weirdos looking at this. Maybe we're like a young person's first introduction to these things.
Gosh, I hope so. I want to be your cool aunt. I know things.
Oh, we're not cool.
No,
just to
you're
say
right. No, you're right.
that.
Cool
We could
because
be your aunt that wants to be cool.
Yeah, your aunt that wants to be cool, but your aunt that knows shit. Like
Hey,
that
fellow
is definitely
teens.
us.
Yeah, and that's our aspiration. So maybe that's what it is. But it is also, it's more young people, but also like people in their 30s and stuff. So, our people.
Check us out.
Send us your rude thoughts at rude@impolitesocietypodcast.com. I wonder how many pieces of my brain would have to be missing before I would stop being able to regurgitate that. And also you can text
Let's
us
shove a
at,
steel rod in there and find out.
at the link in bio. And of course, stay curious and keep marching to the beat of your own. Sorry, that steel rod just went through my head. Cut it.
Exceedingly capricious and capricious? Capricious? Is capricious, right?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Don't
Don't ask me how to pronounce words.
Okay.
Pronunciate words.